Do I need GSA? Rick, what is it? Is it a contract vehicle versus are we talking about a agency? But it's also a series of contract vehicles. I thought today what we would do is we'd get into a little bit of the history of GSAs. What are the contract vehicles that everybody talks about typically, at least in the government contracting space? And then we're going to go through, hey, how do I determine if I need a GSA schedule? Does this apply to me? And what are some of the latest movements in government to increase the use of GSA? Because that is a big topic right now, since I should say March 20th, which is when President Trump's executive order came out. We talked to Kevin Kivlin from GSA in one of the YouTube videos, which you may have seen. And of course, he just came out of GSA and he is a great resource. All right, so here we go. GSA. Essentially, there have been, since the birth of the country, there have been many, many, many initiatives to reform the acquisitions process, to make acquisitions more streamlined, to take better, I guess you could say, enforce better stewardship of taxpayer dollars, right? Because at the end of the day, all federal procurement that's spending our taxpayer dollars on things, right? And in the beginning, especially, those things were related to war. So they were guns and ammo and feeding soldiers and things like that. But there's throughout history always been also instances of abuse, both on the contractor side and on the government side. And I think like any industry, that's not the norm, but this is what we hear about these kind of extreme situations. So there has been a ton of policy and lawmaking that has gone into trying to ensure that there's things like fairness and competition, to ensure that people in the government aren't lining their pockets to put a company on contract, ensuring that contractors aren't, say, charging the government $500 for a hammer, right? Because that's not a good use of our money. If you look at it, I mean, we have letters from like George Washington and presidents and founding fathers talking about, some of the things that they were angry about in the acquisitions process. So what we have is, after a war, and, we win the war or not, then a bunch of politicians come to the scene or people that want to be politicians. And some of them will base or part of their campaign on, hey, I'm going to reform acquisitions. I'm not talking about now. I'm going back in time here, right? And then they come into office and they make a bunch of policy which is aimed at either trying to streamline what we're doing, spend less taxpayer money, whatever, ensure fairness. And what also happens, right, is that it makes the process longer. It takes longer to put a company on contract, right? So, I mean, we're going back to the 1800s. We could see this. And then we go to war again. And then we realize, hey, we can't buy stuff fast enough to actually conduct warfare, defend ourselves from another country or an invader or whatever. So they make more policy and laws that allow us to go faster. And then we have abuses again, right? And again, these are usually not commonplace, but they're the things we hear about. And then we have new politicians come in that probably didn't understand the process to begin with, and they make more law and policy and in probably good, with good intentions. But what that does again is it slows the process down. So now we have even more policy and law, and it takes us longer to buy things. We go to war again. We realize we can't buy things fast enough. More policy, more law, and this self-licking ice cream cone, right? Until we get to, in the 80s where there's 80,000 pages, I think it was 50,000 pages of contract law, policy, regulations that a contracting officer would actually have to go through in order to put a company on contract, right? And this is why we have such a long process in government contracting. Now, one of the efforts to try to streamline things was establishing GSA. And, if my history is correct, GSA was intended to be the central procurement arm of the U.S. government, but that's not how it actually ended up in practice. In practice, GSA takes certain things, they buy certain things. So if you look at different categories of spending, you'll see that GSA is often involved. Tongue in cheek, I refer to GSA as a middleman, right? For those of you that follow our videos, I talk about, there's a lot of middleman stuff out there, and I'll refer to GSA as a middleman because GSA, and keep in mind, when I was an acquisitions officer for the Air Force, for instance, right? So I would be managing money and requirement for the U.S. Air Force. And so it's my job to figure out, hey, what company is going to either develop or give us the thing, the service that we need to solve the problem. But GSA would be a agency and another agency that would potentially get in the middle of me putting the company on contract. Now, for our office, that didn't work out very well. That's not what we wanted to do. And so that's what we saw with GSA being established way back when. You had some agencies didn't have the manpower, welcomed having someone to actually put the companies on contract to buy the things, the stuff. But others did not. Others wanted more direct involvement, right? Because the more people you get involved with something, especially if it's complicated, the more difficult it could be and the longer it could take, and already a long process, right? So that's just some of the thinking from the government side as far as how they're looking at GSA. But aside from being an agency that runs and that does run procurement, a lot of office supplies, things like that, pharmaceuticals, you're going to see, and we can look at how much money is spent and what GSA is actually used for. And it's used for things like software procurement. And there's a variety of things that GSA is great at. Most people are referring to usually the contract vehicles associated with GSA, like the GSA multiple award schedule. And I know that, and I'm just giving you some context here. So when I actually get into showing you, how you can do some research on your own about GSA, just some of the very, very common complaints I've gotten running my consulting business since I've retired from the Air Force and helping companies. I would get companies with a GSA schedule that would come to us and they would say things like, "Hey, Rick, I spent $30,000 getting our GSA schedule." And not to mention how much time it takes, because, usually, like with a schedule, you're typically applying, and it is a robust process that takes a long time. And so they get this GSA schedule. Maybe someone called them and told them they needed GSA to sell to the government. That's not true. And they get the schedule and they're waiting for all of the contracts to come in and nothing happens, right? Because getting the GSA schedule, that just gives the government an option to buy from you. The government has to have some type of contract or contracting mechanism to give you money for a product or service. Now, the GSA schedule or one of the other GSA contracts, that is a way that they can do that. And if they use GSA, right, if their office uses GSA and it's a preferred method, then they may be able to use that to put you on contract. But you still got to do the work. You still got to find the opportunity. You still have to work with the office, figure out how they want to put you on contract. And if you have GSA, you're giving them a good option. So today, we're going to focus a little bit on whether or not you should be even looking at GSA. We'll dive in a little bit as to what they're saying. I thought we'd take a look at what the executive order said as well. Now, the executive order, and by the way, this is one of the reasons it's becoming more in the public eye right now, is because the executive order was essentially saying, hey, we want to use GSA a bit more, right? We want to use GSA more, and we want to expand their role in managing, things like purchasing IT and things of that nature. And of course, in the same breath, they also reduce the manpower of GSA. So, they want to increase how much GSA is being used, but there's also less people to execute. What most companies that are successful at selling to the government do over time is they start collecting contract vehicles. Now, I did a live episode earlier this week on category management, and I lump GSA right into category management. So it's essentially, and this is things like GSA and contract vehicles, government-wide contract vehicles. These don't exist for your benefit, the company's benefit. This exists for the government's benefit. So if you remember, I started off by saying how all of the laws and policies we put in place make it take a long time to be able to put a company on contract, for the government. Well, this does streamline it a bit because essentially, whether it's GSA or any other vehicle, you're either applying to be on it or you're competing to be on it, just like you'd write a normal proposal, solicitation comes out, they're due a month later, you've been preparing for it, you put a lot of work in to get onto whatever the vehicle is, NASA Stoop, ITES, or GSA. And then, months go by after you submit, everything's being looked at. And then, in the case of a competed contract vehicle, maybe 6 months, it might take a year for you to actually win. And then you don't really win anything. You have a contract vehicle that you've competed to be on. And so from the government side, what I can do now is once you're on that vehicle or you're on GSA, I can now, if I need to put a company on contract to give us IT services, you know, when I was doing this with the Air Force, I didn't have 18 months or 12 months to compete these contracts every time. Things were going to come up where I needed services now, right? So now I can turn to these vehicles where technically the companies have already been competed, and I can now make a delivery order or an award to the companies on these contracts much faster, right? Because you've already competed. But here's the catch. If you don't have those vehicles, you're probably not even going to see the opportunity. And even if you did, you wouldn't be able to compete for it because you don't have GSA or you don't have NASA Soup, whatever the vehicle is, the mechanism that I'm going to put them on contract with. So again, very, very important for you to understand if your buyer actually uses vehicles, which ones they use, and then you want to align yourself. So again, a lot of companies end up with a handful of these. They might have GSA and NASA Soup and some IDIQ that, there's a lot of different contracts out there. And then hopefully the office you're trying to sell to can utilize one of those to put you on contract quicker. This is the GSA website. Okay. And it really is great when you are researching something like GSA, when you, not just GSA, any federal agency, right? They all have their own websites. You can get a lot of information from some of these. And then I'm surprised sometimes how often it gets ignored. But what I would tell you to do if you're interested, I'm going to zoom in on it a little bit here. Just click on sell to the government. We're just going to walk through this. All right. I'm not going to click on their step one right now, but they do have some information there, ways you can sell to the government. Oh, hell, let's just walk through it, right? Okay. What they're showing you here is essentially a few things to think about, especially if you're new. There's contracts, there's contract vehicles. I've talked about contract vehicles already. These are pre-competed vehicles that you apply to be on or you compete to be on. It takes a while to get onto them, but once you have them, then the government can utilize them to be on contract faster. They're commercial platforms, they're small business set-asides, and they walk through a few things here about single award contracts, multiple award contracts, and those all exist. And I've talked a little bit about it before. I brought Colonel Orndorff on here, Louis Orndorff. He's a retired colonel. I used to work with him. He was a three-time commander within Defense Contract Management Agency, just because the contracting officers really have a real deep understanding of federal acquisitions regulations and the different vehicles. And he's really a great one. Check out those episodes on YouTube if you want a little bit more of a deep dive there. So this talks about how to access contract opportunities. And of course, GSA is going to be not only the General Services Administration, the agency, but they also have these vehicles. And probably the most popular one is these multiple award schedules, right? And the multiple award schedules are thanks, man. They are essentially going to be split into different categories. There's a lot of variation, right? So it depends on what you sell. And of course, what I would tell you to do is, you can learn about all of this, but we want to, and check out my videos that are, tons of videos on research on federal spending. The first step, guys, figure out what you sell. And then what does the government use to buy what you sell, right? So if you are selling accounting services, which I go back to, and I'm going to make these numbers up, but if you're selling accounting services and you see that the U.S. government spends $100 million a year on small business accounting services, and you're like, I'm going to go get a GSA schedule. Well, the first thing you need to do is not get a GSA schedule. We need to see if the government even uses GSA to buy those services, right? So, and we can go in and we can see all of that information. So if I see that, for instance, the U.S. government, federal government, not state, the federal government is 10%, let's say, of that $100 million a year, $10 million a year is going through GSA. Do you need a GSA schedule to sell to the government? Well, then the answer is no, you don't. It might be a nice to have, down the line. But if only 10% of the spending is going through there, you don't need it right now. Now, um, potential for that to increase, especially with a recent executive order, yes. And what if I do that same drill, right? And Antonio seems to be a master here. He's telling us about so you can check out the comments that he's putting in here, the different categories within GSA. But again, this right now, just deciding if you even need it, I want to know how much they're spending on what I'm selling. So, and this is what we do with clients. I'm like, before you even think about it, let's see if you need it. If I go through and I see that 70% of what you're selling, let's say it's office supplies, is going through different GSA schedules, then do you need GSA? I would say in that case, you absolutely do, right? Especially since they're going to increase what they're doing. So again, there's a lot that we can find out. You don't jump in. GSA is a lot of work getting onto the schedule and then managing it once you have it. It can be a great resource, but it's not for every company. Okay. So make sure you do your homework. Even here, they're talking about conducting market research. Now, they don't give you a lot of tips here, but they are giving you some different places where you can do some of that research. They're giving you keep in mind also sam.gov. You know who runs sam.gov? GSA, right? And guess where you're not going to see the opportunities that are coming through on GSA? Sam.gov, at least for the most part, right? So GSA makes money off the GSA schedule. You should know that. And they actively market to companies to try to get them on the GSA schedule. All right. So a lot of their funding comes from companies using GSA. It's been in the news a lot. It's been in the news also, just a side note, that GSA, a recent letter from GSA talks about potential, if you read between the lines, eliminating the value-added reseller or working more directly with OEMs. If you're familiar with companies like Carasoft, Carasoft resells things like software, and they will hold a GSA schedule, and they will essentially kind of be the middleman between the company selling and GSA. They'll hold now. They have like all GWAX, a bunch of different contract vehicles, so they can kind of make it easier for a company as far as like gaining access to the vehicles, helping them out with that, maybe doing some of the paperwork. But they take a piece of the pie. So GSA is talking about eliminating them or working more directly with the OEMs. Just something to throw out there. Now, the list of websites they're giving you here, there is a lot of data available on sam.gov that you can go through and check out. I might do an entire episode on that later. You do need to be able to log into sam.gov to use a lot of that. All right. Because there is a login. Really easy to do. Okay. You don't need to pay someone to get in there. You certainly don't need to pay someone to register your business either. If you're brand new and you're like, hey, do I need to register? Because a lot of people will try to sell you, hey, I'll register your business in sam.gov. Very easy. In fact, I went over yesterday. Like, you can go right to the website, and it has the checklist of all the things that you need to register. And it's just, kind of take those things, prepare ahead of time, go in, spend an hour inputting everything, and it takes a couple weeks after everything's input, usually. Sometimes it can take a little bit longer. Now, look, they're giving you the ceiling rates for GSA here. I linked to that. They are giving you, and I'm going to show you GSA eLibrary, very, very valuable for those out there that aren't aware of what's going on there. They're showing you I went through actually Acquisitions Gateway, was it yesterday? Day before, I was talking about acquisitions forecasts. This is a great link because this is where you can go to find out about opportunities that aren't on sam.gov yet, right? Because, Aaron, this is again, big picture. Selling to the government's hard. Selling to the government takes a long time. It can take 6 to 18 months to sell to the government, but it can take longer than that, by the way. And it can be faster than that too. Potentially, if you're on one of these vehicles, it could be faster. But you want to take advantage of the actual pluses of government contracting, which is all of the data points, like something like over 300 data points for every contract that the government has with a company is published. You can look at it. You can also look at, because the federal agencies forecast the things that they're going to buy. Not everything, but it can give you a good head start on your pipeline. And remember, relationships are very important selling to the government. Find opportunities early, build relationships. and understand what they're buying, how they buy. All right, so they're also giving you FPDS. We're not going to get into that today. GSA Advantage. Okay, great. Now, what if I want to get on to GSA? All right. Well, step two here: compete for a contract. See if it'll come open up here. Okay, so it's going through some of the basics that a lot of you probably already know. Right? You have to be registered in SAM.gov. You have to have your UEI. It's going through that. Um, to be eligible to compete for small businesses, you need to certify as a small business. Now, here's what they're going to push is becoming a schedule holder. Okay. And again, I just want to foot stomp. Once you have the GSA schedule, that does not mean the government's just going to come to you and start buying, right? You need to market yourself. You need to tell your buyers you have this. You're getting a schedule or any other vehicle to make it easier for the government to buy from you. And typically, the more options that you can present the government buyer, assuming that they use those options, you can make it easier for them, right? But some offices aren't going to use GSA. You want to make sure you have the right vehicle for the offers you're trying to sell to. And again, we can see that it's all published. It's all published. We can see it on USA Spending. It's easier to see on other platforms. All right, become a schedule holder. Now I'm going to click on this one right here just to give you an idea of what you're going to be looking at. Okay, so it says to become a multiple award schedule holder, which is um, the GSA MAS, you need to submit an offer and be awarded the contract before you can pursue opportunities that are restricted. This is the key. You can see this restricted to MAS contract holders. Okay. Because it is a restriction, it's a long process. It's going to probably take you a little bit of time and money. I've heard reports 6 months to 12 months currently. Maybe it takes longer. Maybe you can get in there a little bit faster, but it's not an easy process. So you want to make sure that you need it before you get it because you don't have to have this to sell to the government. It depends on what you sell. And if you determine that you do need it, remember you compete or you apply to be on this. And once you have it, once they've determined your rates and everything, now you still have the same road mapping and pipelining process that you'd have even if you weren't using this with the government. You have to identify who buys what you sell. You have to find opportunities early. You have to get in front of them. You have to let them know you have this. And you need to do that before the solicitation comes out in most cases. You want to get them because you can advise a government office to use GSA. And if they use GSA, this is the key, right? See, this is what I highlighted. Opportunities are restricted. If I'm selling anything, right? Guitars, auto parts, nuclear scientist services, whatever it is I'm providing the government. If I find out about the opportunity for, let's say, the nuclear scientists, or maybe Department of Energy needs 5 nuclear scientists, right? Well, if I find out about that 6 months before the solicitation comes out, maybe I find a source that saw it or an RFI, and I reply to that. They might not ask me anything about how the contracting is going to go down, but I'm going to tell them, I'm like, look, I have the best nuclear scientists in town. And I have a GSA schedule. I recommend that you put this on, that you use GSA to compete this, right? So if you do that, if you get them to do that, then this will be restricted. GSA often, it will just be not just the GSA schedule holders, just the GSA schedule holders that have a schedule like specific to the opportunity. So the only ones that might even know about this are going to be those with GSA. It's often not going to come out on SAM.gov. you might not even know about it by the time the solicitation gets here. So it is a very effective way of selling to the government if you do collect a variety of these vehicles. Okay. And we're going to see more of them. This is where the government's going. It's called category management. Category management has been very effective. It's not just a trend. We're going to see more of it. And we are specifically going to see more use of GSA in certain areas. You got to know what those areas are. I may play some of the video I had with Kevin, who recently transitioned out of a GSA recently. But what I would tell you is if you are providing something that's mission critical to the military, you could probably assume that GSA is not going to be dramatically increasing anything there, right? Especially often the more technical something is, a program manager on the government side is going to want to have their hands very deep on it. And just because GSA is involved doesn't mean that the program manager won't be working with a company either. I don't want you to have that impression. But GSA is not going to take over acquisition for the government. They couldn't if they wanted to. They'd have to not be reducing people. They'd have to hire, probably 100 times the staff that they have now. But we are going to see it increase in certain areas. And I think the best way to understand what areas is to look at the spending, the historical spending. And if you see spending, if you see GSAs involved in certain areas, office supplies, pharmaceuticals, maybe software, whatever, it is that you're selling, I would assume we're going to see more of it. And then maybe a good idea where before I may have told someone if I saw a low involvement of GSA with their particular service, I might say, hey, you can hold off. Now I might say, you might want to apply for GSA just to hedge your bets, right? Because if we do get to increase, if GSA's use does increase dramatically, you could be left without a contract. You have to talk to the office that's buying from you. Know if they're going to make any contracting changes. If it was a sole source, are they going to go to competing? Are they going to use a GWAC other than, something other than GSAs? So know that. Now, how to apply to become a GSA member. So again, this is all on the GSA website, but we're going to just go through this just so everyone can kind of get an idea. So, and GSA does allude to, they're not hiding anything here. I mean, they do say, do your research. That's part of their messaging on these websites. Decide if getting a multiple award schedule is in your best interest. You do. You have to, I've been through that ad nauseum here. You absolutely have to determine that first, right? Don't let somebody sell you on getting GSA. Plenty of people out there that are charging a lot. I mean, I've probably talked to, God, I don't know how many consultations have I done. I believe I'm over 700 consultations with companies since I started our business, GovClose, and our consulting company. Probably 50-ish of them were people that were sold a GSA schedule by someone that, was a GSA expert, and they paid them 30 grand or something to get them on the schedule. And a lot of them just didn't need it. Okay. So, but if you do have it, by the way, if anybody fits into that category, GSA, you didn't throw your money away, because even if it's not used a lot, it could be used more. And it's a good, I think GSA is a good authority builder. It gives me confidence. Like, even though I never utilized a GSA when I was putting companies on contract for the Air Force back, in 2018, I was a program manager, by the way. So I'd work with a contracting officer. I was more on the funding requirement side, I would often figure out the company we needed to build the tool that we needed. And then we would figure out how to get them on contract. But I used our agency, our office had our own contract vehicles, our own tools and mechanisms to put companies on contract. So you want to make sure that you understand the office you're talking to, what they're actually using. So what it's saying here is contracting officers may set aside orders using this. Even if your company is more than 2 years old, you may still qualify. So there's something called Startup Springboard. I'm not going to go through each of these steps here, folks, but just be aware that they're here. Doing a readiness assessment. So if you click on that, and I have clicked through these, I know one of the tabs, but I'll open up another one here. So you could do a readiness assessment. They have a list of questions here that you can go through to see if you're ready for it. And just remember that there is work in managing this schedule. Okay. I have plenty of clients that went on to get these and utilize them very well, but you have to manage the schedule. I often say that the real work doesn't come in getting the contract. It comes after you win the contract, right? So now you actually have to provide the service, but you get all of the other stuff that comes with government contracting, right? There's a big accounting piece to this. There is managing these contract vehicles, making sure that you're doing what you're supposed to on there. So the questions, if you just click on it, I believe, yeah, here we go. So this will open it up, and you guys can go through this if you're a business owner and you want to learn, hey, is this something that is right for our company? Go through each of the questions, talk, hey, who's the GSA administrator? They should, and there's also a bunch of mandatory training in here that you have to go through. So they're not leaving you high and dry. Let me see if some of the training here. Pathway. Oh, here's one. Yeah. Have you completed the Pathways to Success training? So there's some training here. There's also training that's not government related, but you start with this because it's free and because this is what they want you to do. They're asking you to take a look at the GSA eLibrary. And so they're asking for some things here. What about compliance, trade agreements, etc.? So lots of good tools here. So take a look at the readiness assessment if you're actually thinking about getting this scheduled. You can also and by the way, I've reached out to GSA many times just doing research. Most of them will be more than happy to talk with you. For me, I like to talk to a live human being on the other side to see, hey, is this something that makes sense for me? And especially if you're, even if you, by the way, if you go through this and you see some requirements for your company, like how long the company should be in business, if you can sell to the government, like do you have existing contracts, all of this stuff. If it looks like you don't meet the requirements, but you think that you really would like the GSA schedule, maybe an agency has told you that, it'd be great if you were on there, reach out to GSA. Okay. Cause my experience is there's a waiver for everything in the government. There's a waiver for most things in the government. So there's typically a tremendous amount of gray area in the way policies and regulations are written. So don't stop with, especially if it's a question mark, like talk to somebody, you get the real answer and see if see if it makes sense for you. All right. Lots of different links here that you could go to as you're going through the process. You have your readiness assessment here, but I thought what we do now is I just want to familiarize you with some different websites that you would be looking at if you had the GSA schedule. Okay. One is eBuy, right? So if you're on GSA, and I wanted to give you a visual representation of this because you're probably used to looking at SAM.gov, right? For your opportunities, but this is something that I just want you to understand. If GSA is heavily used to buy products and services that you sell, you're not going to see that here. At least you're not going to see a lot of it here, right? Once you have the schedule now, you might be going here. Okay. And so then you'll have to have an account and you sign in. And also once you're on schedule, you may get notified, right, when different opportunities arise. So there's a different portal depending on what you're selling if you have a schedule. There's GSA Advantage. This is more product related, but still a lot of good information here that you can find on the website. Antonio says, sure. So maybe if I can bring it up, if I can remember my login and password, maybe I can show you that. Look, there's a lot of information here, but just know, and by the way, when I'm talking with companies, like when I think about products, right? When I think about things like office supplies, when I think about things like this, like that lock, for instance, I think GSA, right? When I think about products, when I think about even things that maybe you'll see in a grocery store, though, the military has their own way of purchasing that type of thing. I do think products in GSA, and typically I see GSA is a lot more involved with the purchasing of those. If you're not familiar with the term NSN, typically products are going to have NSN numbers associated with them, especially things like tools, right? So aircraft parts, tools, like all of these are going to have their own specific NSN number. So, and then you can also see a little bit more on that, like through Defense Logistics Agency, for instance. And another site where a lot of that stuff is purchased is called DSIP, DSIP. Get back on this. So as you can see, I'm always looking at these executive orders. This is just a rabbit trail, right? But we're still under the government. We need to be aware of what's going on, and we need to be aware of all the acquisition reforms they want to make. Typically, what I see when we're talking about acquisition reform, not just this, I mean, what we know about this presidency, I don't know how far this is going to go, but in past, I've seen some new administrations making significant headway with acquisitions reform, and some making a little bit. Typically, it's never as much as they'd like to see. A lot of the standard procedures usually remain in place, but right now, they're pushing increased use of GSA and increased use of other transaction authority, which is interesting and fast, and maybe not as separated from the federal acquisitions regulations as people think. And I'm going to do an episode on that because what we're seeing, and now I'm going down the OTA rabbit trail, but other transaction authority, if you look at some of these OTAs that are coming out, you're going to see FAR clauses associated with them, which OTA is supposed to, a lot of people think, oh, completely separate from the federal acquisitions regulations, but not completely separate. I have my own opinion on that. Let's take a look at the tool that I mentioned that can allow you to see opportunities that are coming out on things like GSA and the other contract vehicles, even if you don't have those contracts. Govly. The premise of this is, and I interviewed the CEO of Govly on probably, I don't know what episode number, but if you're on YouTube, you can go to our YouTube channel. It's GovClose. Just type in GovClose, you'll get to the channel. Probably it was over a year ago when I interviewed him, but we went through as they were building this out, what it looked like. And it's really great. I don't particularly want to log into this right now, but basically what happens is as a business, as a small business, you can get partnered with a company that's a prime on one of these contracts. Okay. And so this is how they get around everything here. So, and then that company that you're partnered with, maybe they have 8 contracts. They might have GSA MAS, they might have NASA SOUP, ITES, they might have, and those are just the big ones that come to mind and some of the ones I've used in the past. But they then will populate this with the opportunities. So when you go in here as a small business, you can then see opportunities. Like you type in what you're selling. Hey, I sell, a user experience, development for software portals, or I sell, again, I have 3 nuclear scientists that need to do X, or I'm providing IT services. You can put it in here and then it will show you the opportunities that are coming out on GSA and that are on some of the other platforms. And then if you have something, that meets those opportunities, just like, anytime you're building your pipeline, you can then get matched with a prime that has that. This is just a more streamlined version of subcontracting, right? So, I mean, normally if you're subcontracting, you can do a part of a solicitation or the requirements that the government's putting out. You're going to then reach out to a company that can do the rest of it. And ideally, that company is going to have past performance with the agency that you're trying to sell to. And that's going to make your subcontracting proposal more competitive, right? Um, Also, that's not the only time you want to consider a subcontracting agreement. You may consider subcontracting if you do find yourself in a situation where, you're not on GSA, but an opportunity's coming out. Maybe you've been selling to an office for a while and they switch to one of these other GWACs. Well, now since you can't submit a proposal on that, you're relegated to forming a teaming arrangement with a company that has that contract vehicle. And then, you would be a subcontractor to them. But this happens all the time. I know some of my clients are only subcontracting and doing really, really well. So you can do very well subcontracting. And if you do this long enough, you'll probably have primes and subcontracts. So just throwing that out there. So this is a good tool that you can use if you want to check it out. They're not sponsoring me or anything, so I'm just making that available to you guys. So I've used it. It's pretty good. Then as far as USA spending is concerned, there's a few things that you can do when you are searching for, hey, how much is GSA going to be involved with the purchasing? And I mentioned earlier that I feel like this tool is not as good as some of the other ones out there. If you guys aren't familiar with USA Spending, it's a government website that GSA runs. And I talked to the guy that built this tool, by the way, about 6 weeks ago. So they run it. It's good. It's a prettier interface than like the ad hoc stuff in sam.gov or FPDS. All right. I'm not as confident when I'm looking at GSA spending in here, but I can at least start to get a sense of if GSA is going to be involved in this simple search here, which I ran before I even started the live session just to make sure that it would work. Because sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's really slow. I just went back the past 4 years and clicked on IT services, right? So that's a big spend. You can see here, DoD spends $69 billion. First thing I look for is, do I see any spending? Does GSA pop up? Right. Some people would argue, and again, this is just however the system was built. If I don't see GSA in here, I may start thinking that GSA is not involved. I don't necessarily know that that's true, but if I do see GSA here, either one of two things is happening. Somebody else is talking about Steamboo. I've never heard of it. There's a lot of places that are better to see this information. I think Gov1IQ and GovTribe are two of the best. I haven't used the one in the comments, so I'm not going to comment on it. But check it out at your own expense. But if I see this, I think there's two ways you could interpret GSA spending on USA spending, right? You could say, hey, GSA bought these IT services for themselves, right, as an agency, or they were involved somehow in buying them for another agency. Because remember, GSA is kind of a middleman, right? GSA is not, when I'm using a GSA or an agent, when a federal agency like the Air Force is using GSA schedules or the GSA contracting team to put something on for them, GSA is not the funding organization. They're not the end user. They would be the awarding organization, right? So I could see here, all right, well, we've got GSA administration is just popping up as a federal agency. Now, another thing that I can do is I can look in here at the awards type, right? And I didn't go through it on the GSA website, but GSA does go through some of the contracts. And if you look at IDVs, right, which are essentially contract types, if you look at the individual contracts, you can do this here to some extent, but we can also look at it on FPDS. Typically, if those IDVs start with a G or GS, we know that they're going, because each one has codes. We know that GSA is going to be involved, but GSA is certainly not the only one of these. Now, federal supply schedule, on the other hand, if I see that popping up, well, now I have a pretty good indication, right? So that's going to give me, I don't know if you guys can even see that. It's probably, you can see here, this is one of the options, right? So I could click that, see how much of this is on federal supply schedule. And you can see here, this is where things get a little, where you have to start navigating this a little bit differently, right? So it says 0, but remember, now we have this contract IDV tab here. So I just think trying to look this up on USA Spending is a little bit clunky, but I've already seen enough to know that it's being used to some degree. It just means I need to do further research, and I'm probably going to use one of my paid tools to do that, just because it's going to be a lot faster. This is one of the contracts that I clicked on. And, this one, you could see the awarding agency is GSA. And as I start scrolling through here, I can see, all right, GSA. Then I see the VA, right? Like, all right, what else is going on here? And I can, it's giving you a lot of, by the way, this does give you a ton of information, which I love. Now I could see here that it's GSA, the Federal Acquisition Service. I can see the office. And, we can keep on looking at things like competition details here. Look, now so this is a good point, actually. Just because you're on GSA or any other, or a GWAC, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be a competition. Often there is still a competition utilizing these vehicles, right? So you still have to do the same best practices that you would have to do going after any other contract. And so I've showed you the steps in the CRM that I use, right? From finding the opportunity early, right, to potentially recommending to the office to put it on GSA, because that's going to, remember, if you get them to use a vehicle, that restricts anybody that doesn't have that vehicle from going after it. And it also might restrict them from ever seeing it. But there's tons of other companies that do have these vehicles, right? So check it. Number of offers received here, 9. So even though GSA is being used, there's still 9 offers received, right? So you still had to compete. No preference. Yeah. So again, you can go through that. You can spend a lot of time in GSA, and you can learn a lot about whether or not you should actually be going after one of these vehicles or not. Great. Well, guys, hopefully this was informative. There's a lot that we could talk about with GSA managing. How do you manage the contract once you already have it? I can tell you that, how I used it. So for instance, one of my clients I sold software for years. And so I managed their pipelines with different federal agencies. And I used GSA all the time. So from a seller standpoint, from a sales executive standpoint, I used GSA, and I don't mind telling you how I did it. I can tell you this: I never wrote a proposal. I never wrote a single proposal. So what I did, and this is the value of, once you're already selling to the government, one of the easiest ways, the best way, the thing to focus on is your government customer. Okay. And what I would do is I would make sure that my government customer was happy. So you could walk in. So once you have a set of customers, so if you're a sales executive or if you're a consultant or if you have a business, don't just sell it, set it and forget it. Once they have it, I'm reaching out to the user, not GSA. I wasn't reaching out to GSA. I was reaching out to the government user, the program manager typically. Hey, ma'am, sir, how is the product or tool that we gave you? How's it functioning? How's everything going? If it's going great, awesome, right? Sometimes it's not. And if it's not, well, hey, I'm going to get my team to work on it, right? And if I get my team to work on it, we're going to go in there until everything's going smoothly and until they are happy. That's what you should be doing anyway. And then, the next time I reach out to them, like, hey, how's everything going? Great. Hey, by the way, do you need any new licenses? Are you aware of these new products or features that we have? Oh, cool. Let's set up a demo, right? That is the best way to actually, I mean, in my opinion, that's the fastest way also to sell. You're already once you're on contract, you're upselling, you're making sure you're taking care of them. And if they don't need what you have, hey, do you know anyone else that, could potentially use our service or our product or feature? If they love what you have, they'll recommend you. And guess what? Acquisitions officers, they hang out with other acquisitions officers, program managers, engineers, contracting officers. So it's actually a relatively small space, and they kind of know what each other's doing. So you can always ask, upsell, get recommendations, get warm intros to other offices. This is how regular sales happens too, right? Just a lot of people get lost in the government contracting policies and regulations and don't think the relationship's as important, but it is. I suppose the last thing that I could show you here is, I'm going to bring it up, a GSA pipeline strategy built into it. It'll just give you an idea if I walk the different opportunities, I should say, through the different steps. So when I pipeline, I don't have like 4 columns where it's, hey, good, better, best, or like lead opportunity. I have like find opportunity as early as possible, right? It could be a source of SOT, RFI, whatever. Set up meeting with the government. I have 22 different steps depending on the strategy. And what that does, that keeps my sales team in line, right? It keeps me honest and them, because you're going to have a pipeline in order to build your pipeline, guys, where you can actually hit your numbers every year. Meaning your quota if you're a sales executive, or if you're a business owner and you've done the research, what you could potentially make each year. You have to have enough opportunities in the pipeline to make up for the fact that the government's going to lose funding in certain areas. Things will get delayed, right? There are things that you will never be able to change on the government's part. And the government doesn't care about your quarterly metrics, right? They're just concerned about, hey, they're fun. They have their own metrics that they're concerned about. So, and the way we make up for that is we take opportunities that we can actually win and build a pipeline that makes sense. It's regimented, knowing and understanding what our close rate is, knowing the strategy that we're using, make sure our sales team's trained. And we walk through those steps, and that's how we are going to win these contracts. And the exact same thing with GSA. You don't get GSA and the skies don't open and you have contracts and delivery orders and everything fall into your lap. That doesn't happen. It happens sometimes, but you cannot plan on that, right? So if you have something unique, I have reached out to companies from the government side, and I have been reached out to on the company side. But that's great when that happens. But that's not a plan, right? That's luck and timing. And they have to know, in order for that to happen, you have to be constantly in front of them. You guys probably have your own dashboards, right? Where you have, where you're managing contracts and opportunities. But I just wanted to give you a sense of how I look at it and how important it is you're not just throwing crap against the wall and seeing if it sticks, right? We have a very regimented process for how we go after opportunities. Now, this is a small-ish pipeline, right? This is just something I'm going to use as an example. Now, if I was managing GSA, I'm going to have my own GSA strategy. Okay. Here you're looking at a sources sought pipeline strategy and an 8A, but I'm going to show you the GSA one as well, and an 8A pipeline strategy. By the way, you can be 8A and have a GSA schedule. In fact, there are mechanisms specifically for that, right? And you could certainly utilize that. So again, having a set aside or a certification, you want to build a strategy that's specific to the type of company you have, combined with what you're selling and who you're selling to. And all of that is going to come into this grand master plan. If you've done your research, if you find that it's the, Army Corps of Engineers and the three main offices are going to be in, California or maybe a couple other places. And if you see that, hey, I'm an 8A company and they use GSA, I'm just making that up, but we can see it. We can see if that's true. Well, then you're going to have this GSA 8A strategy, right? And part of your strategy might be identifying companies that have contracts already that are going to be renewed and they have already graduated from the 8A program, right? So you might be identifying those opportunities, then reaching out direct to the offices. That's a very specific strategy. But my point is, understand your company, understand who you're selling to, build a focused strategy. In this case, I'm looking at a total pipeline. You just know that you want to know your conversion rate. In this case, it's 11%. I have a $12 million pipeline. That's what I can probably expect, right? So this is probably a good example of what a sales executive for a company is going to be looking at with the federal government. Now, personally, I would be building a much larger pipeline here. And that's kind of the beauty so we could build a $100 million pipeline, but you're going to have a lot of opportunities in there. And I have very specific strategies how I'm going to do it. And I'm going to show you the steps here coming up. But this 11%, if you don't know what your close rate is, you can, as long as you're following best practices that I talk about on YouTube all the time, so you can look at our free videos. By the way, you can always go to govclose.com, and that's where, our flagship training program is. It's a 1-year training implementation program where I personally onboard everybody. We have almost 200 people in there now. We have a team. We are not just training on going through all the information like we did. We're building strategies for specific companies and then pipeline, and we help them execute on the backside. So whether you're a company or a lot of veterans and federal workers coming in, learning GovCon, and then starting careers, right? They're starting careers, starting their own consulting businesses. They're going out and getting high paid account executive jobs. Companies are paying, I was paid over $300,000 a year to be an account executive for a company. They fully knew I was running my consulting business. It's worth it for companies to pay a lot for sales executives that understand government contracting, because there aren't that many that do. And the amount of revenue you can bring in more than makes up for the salary. So just be aware that that's out there for the federal workers, veterans out there, National Guard and reservists. That's like it's a slam dunk. So again, I need to know what's working. I need to know what my close rate is. And then what I'm looking at is I want to know, here, let me go here and take a look at the actual opportunities. So this is a sources sought list of opportunities. This is how I put it together, right? Because I want to know what are every strategy that you use selling to the government is going to have specific steps. And they're different. Some of them, some of these things are going to be the same, meaning I want to find opportunities early. I want to influence. I want to build relationships, provide value, and also a lot of redundancy, right? And when I say redundancy, so this is a sources sought pipeline. But for instance, and by the way, when I have a sales team doing something like this, we're going right through each of these steps, right? So the Saigon Noodle one there, like let's take this user interface opportunity, 735,000, right? So I have them, if I'm on a sales call, I'm like, all right, so they at this point they found an RFI. We no-go'd it, meaning they decided if they were going to go after it or not. Do I need teaming partners? Yes or no? Email the government. We're always trying to establish communication with the government office. We're asking them questions. Okay. If we're ahead of the solicitation, you're in the market research phase, and we can find out a lot about these opportunities, a lot that might not be included in the solicitation itself, right? Solicitation's a request for proposal, request for quote, whether it's GSA or anything else. I'm finding it early. I'm talking with them. And again, if you have the steps laid out here, it's easier for you and your team not to forget a step. Write the response. You need to submit. Okay, did you write it? Did you submit it? Yeah, I submitted it, boss. Awesome. Great. Did you confirm receipt? No. Well, look, if they didn't confirm receipt, meaning if you sent a sources sought or a proposal, especially to a government office, because a lot of times you're just emailing it to them. And if you email it and you don't get hey, I got it, thanks, you have to assume that they do not have it. Because when you this happened to me, this happened when my wife would email me, back in my government days. Her email her email signature had a link in it. And so we get flagged every time. I wouldn't get her emails. People would send in responses. If you put an attachment on an email, guess what happens? More times than not, the government email system will block that email from hitting the inbox. So if you send in a sources sought or a proposal and you don't hear back from the government, they didn't get it. Just assume that they didn't get it. Okay. And then again, you're managing your team. Did you request a meeting? Well, no, I didn't request a meeting. I didn't even get a confirmed receipt. Hey, I'm always requesting a meeting. And then I want to get in there. So there's a bunch of different things in here. I mentioned you get the same thing this is my recommendation. Long-winded, and I'm going to get off here. You're going to have the same thing for GSA. So I have a pipeline built for GSA, 8A, integrators. Remember, check out govclose.com when you get a chance. Follow me on LinkedIn and hit the notification bell so you can get updates whenever we put out, because we put out the GovCon newsletter. We do YouTube interviews with CEOs and subject matter experts, reviewing tools, all of that stuff. We took a look at Govly today, right? You remember? So that's a tool where we can see the different opportunities coming out on a GSA if we don't have GSA, right? So that might be something that you want to take a look at. All right, guys, I'm out. Cheers.